From the outside, their marriage looked enviable. Friends admired them at gatherings. Neighbors whispered about how fortunate the husband was to have such a beautiful, intelligent wife by his side. She carried herself with grace, an elegant black woman who spoke with warmth, listened with compassion, and worked tirelessly to keep her household together. She believed in love, in loyalty, and in building a life side by side. But behind closed doors, the reality was far from the picture-perfect illusion. Her husband barely noticed her anymore. When she tried to share her successes, like the promotion she had earned at work or the charity project she was leading, he would shrug, distracted by his phone. When she put on a new dress and waited for him to say she looked lovely, his eyes barely flicked up. Instead, he would bring up his ex, as if some ghost from the past was still haunting their marriage. Angela used to love that restaurant, he would say casually, forgetting that his wife was sitting right there. Or worse, Angela would never react that way. Every comparison was like a cut to her spirit. She tried to smile through the pain, but each remark chipped away at the love she had poured into the marriage. Nights became lonelier. He worked late, or at least claimed to. Dinners turned into silence, the air heavy with words left unsaid. And when she reached for him, emotionally, physically, he pulled away, distracted, detached, uninterested. She began to wonder if her presence even mattered to him anymore. She was loyal, supportive, everything a partner should be, yet he looked through her as though she were invisible. Still, despite the cracks spreading through her heart, she clung to hope. She prayed he would remember who she was to him, that she was his wife, not a shadow of someone else. But deep down, she knew something was shifting. The foundation of her marriage was crumbling, and she was the only one trying to hold it together. This was only the beginning. The wife's intuition was right. Her husband's heart was drifting somewhere else, somewhere it no longer belonged. It wasn't just neglect. It was an obsession. His ex, Angela, had re-entered his orbit, and from that moment on, nothing was the same. At first, the signs were subtle. A name muttered in his sleep. A smile that lingered too long when her texts popped onto his phone. The way he would disappear into another room just to answer her calls. His wife noticed every detail, even though he thought he was careful. Then, subtlety turned into shamelessness. He began to bring Angela into their conversations constantly, as if testing boundaries. He'd reminisce about old memories in front of his wife, laughing about trips they once took, inside jokes only they shared. Sometimes he would even defend Angela when others criticized her, his tone soft and protective. It was as though he had forgotten who his wife was, choosing instead to idolize a woman who belonged to his past. The obsession spread through his daily life. He dressed differently, styled his hair in ways Angela once liked. He picked restaurants she used to love, even though his wife preferred others. Slowly, his marriage bed grew cold, not because of a lack of desire, but because his heart and mind were elsewhere. For the wife, the betrayal was more than physical. It was emotional. It was spiritual. She felt invisible, discarded, as though her worth was being measured against a ghost she could never compete with. Every day, she wondered, why marry me if your heart still belonged to her? Why make vows you never intended to keep? But the husband was blind. So consumed by nostalgia and ego, he didn't see the quiet strength building inside his wife. He didn't realize that his neglect and obsession were pushing her toward a breaking point. And he certainly didn't see what destiny was preparing for her. While he was busy looking backward, her future was about to unfold in ways he could never imagine. For months, she endured the silence, the comparisons, the growing shadow of Angela hanging over their marriage. She tried everything, cooking his favorite meals, dressing in the ways he once admired, even planning weekends away just to rekindle what they had lost. But nothing worked. His eyes, his heart, his energy were all elsewhere. The final straw came on a quiet evening. She had spent the whole day preparing a dinner to celebrate her husband's recent promotion, hoping it would remind him that she was still here, his wife, his partner, the woman who stood by him through his struggles. She lit candles, set the table with his favorite dishes, and waited. Hours passed. No call, no text, just silence. When he finally walked in near midnight, his shirt smelling of expensive perfume that wasn't hers, he barely looked at the table she had prepared. I already ate, he muttered, brushing past her as if she were nothing more than an inconvenience. Something inside her shattered. Not just sadness, resolve. For the first time, she looked at him not with longing or hope, but with clarity. She saw the man he had become, selfish, careless, blind to her worth. She realized she was fighting to save a marriage that he had already abandoned. That night, she sat alone at the candlelit table, untouched food around her, tears streaming down her face. But those tears were different. They weren't of weakness. They were the release of a woman who finally knew her limit. She wouldn't beg anymore. She wouldn't compete with a ghost. She wouldn't live in the shadow of another woman's name. From that moment forward, her heart began to change. She started focusing on herself, her career, her passions, her happiness. The husband was too distracted to notice that she was no longer chasing him, no longer clinging to a crumbling love. He thought she would never leave, that her loyalty was permanent. But he was wrong. What he didn't know was that his neglect had awakened something powerful inside her, a strength that would soon carry her into a world he could never touch. And when she finally stepped into that new world, he would regret ever taking her for granted. Once she made the choice to stop clinging to a loveless marriage, something remarkable happened. She felt free. For the first time in years, her energy wasn't wasted trying to please a man who didn't see her worth. Instead, she began pouring that energy into herself. She threw herself into her career with renewed passion, taking on projects others considered too ambitious. Late nights that were once spent waiting on her husband's return were now filled with strategy, creativity, and vision. And people noticed. Colleagues admired her drive. Leaders recognized her talent. She wasn't just doing her job, she was excelling, and doors began to open. But her rise wasn't only professional. She rediscovered the things that once brought her joy: painting, long walks, volunteering in her community. She started surrounding herself with people who valued her, a friend who reminded her that she was radiant, capable, and worthy of love. Physically, her transformation was undeniable. She carried herself with new confidence, her posture straighter, her smile brighter. No longer weighed down by neglect, she radiated strength. When she walked into a room, people turned their heads, not just because of her beauty, but because of the unshakable aura of a woman who had survived heartbreak and emerged stronger. And while her husband remained distracted with his ex, she barely noticed. The pain that once consumed her was now replaced by determination. She no longer sought his approval. She no longer cared for his validation. Instead, she was becoming the best version of herself, a version he had never truly appreciated. One evening, at a charity gala she had been invited to through her professional network, she walked in wearing an elegant gown that shimmered under the lights. She wasn't there for attention, she was there for purpose. Yet, unknowingly, this night would mark the beginning of a new chapter, one that would turn her husband's world upside down. For in that room, among the wealthy and powerful, her presence would not go unnoticed. And soon, someone far beyond her husband's reach would see her for who she truly was, a queen rising from the ashes, ready to claim the life she deserved. The ballroom was alive with music and laughter, crystal chandeliers scattering golden light across marble floors. Guests in designer gowns and tailored suits mingled, their conversations humming with power, ambition, and wealth. Yet, amidst the glittering crowd, one woman stood out, not because of her dress, though it was breathtaking, but because of her presence. She carried herself with quiet elegance, a confidence that turned heads without demanding attention. That woman was her. She hadn't come looking for anyone, least of all love. Her only aim was to represent her company, make connections, and continue proving to herself that she was far stronger than the pain she had endured. But destiny has a way of rewriting plans in the most unexpected moments. Across the room, a man watched her. He was tall, striking, with an aura that spoke of influence and power. People whispered his name with admiration. He was a billionaire investor, known for both his wealth and his sharp mind. Yet in that moment, surrounded by admirers, his attention was locked solely on her. When their eyes met, it wasn't fleeting. It was electric, a spark that neither of them could ignore. He excused himself from his circle of executives and walked directly toward her. The crowd seemed to part as he approached, as if fate itself was making way for this meeting. "Good evening," he said, his voice smooth, confident, yet unexpectedly warm. "I couldn't help but notice. You seem different from everyone else in this room." She smiled politely, used to empty flattery. But there was something genuine in his tone, something that made her pause. Their conversation began with small talk, but soon unfolded into something deeper. They spoke about ambition, resilience, dreams, and challenges. For the first time in a long while, she felt seen, not as a comparison, not as someone's wife, but as herself. The hours slipped by unnoticed. Where others saw a billionaire conversing with a beautiful woman, she experienced something far greater, a meeting of two souls who understood the power of struggle and the beauty of rising above it. What she didn't know then was that this encounter would shift the course of her life forever. And soon, the husband who once ignored her would see what he had lost and envy the man who saw her worth. It began with whispers. A colleague mentioned seeing his wife at a gala, radiant in a gown that shimmered under the chandeliers. Another joked she had the whole room staring, especially one man in particular. At first, he brushed it off. But when he scrolled through social media and saw a photo, her laughing beside the billionaire, something inside him twisted. Jealousy. For the first time in years, he realized that she wasn't waiting at home for him anymore. She wasn't clinging to his neglect or begging for scraps of affection. She was out in the world, shining brighter than ever, and worse, someone else was noticing. Someone far more powerful, far more successful, far more everything than he could ever be. The image haunted him. The way she smiled, the light in her eyes, a light he hadn't seen in years. He remembered when she used to look at him like that. Now it belonged to another man. Suddenly, the woman he had ignored became the woman he couldn't stop thinking about. He began calling her more, sending half-hearted texts, even suggesting dinners he once refused to attend. But she was no longer the same. Where she once rushed to please him, she now responded with calm detachment. Her answers were polite but distant, her eyes no longer pleading for his love. The more she pulled away, the more desperate he became. He showed up at her workplace, uninvited, trying to spark conversations. He reminded her of their shared history, the good times they once had. But every attempt only highlighted the truth. He was clinging to something he had already destroyed. And then came the breaking moment. At a high-profile event, he saw her arrive with the billionaire by her side. Cameras flashed, people whispered, and he stood frozen, watching as the woman he once dismissed walked into the room like royalty. She wasn't his neglected wife anymore. She was admired, respected, desired, and it was another man who stood proudly beside her. The jealousy burned through him like fire. He had lost her. Not because she left too soon, but because he had never valued her until it was far too late. Her journey had begun in pain, nights of loneliness, the sting of neglect, and the cruel weight of being compared to another woman. But pain has a way of shaping strength, and she had transformed it into power. By the time her husband finally realized what he had lost, she had already outgrown him. No longer the woman who begged for love, she'd become a woman who commanded respect. Every room she entered seemed to pause for her presence. Every word she spoke carried weight. She wasn't defined by her husband's neglect anymore. She was defined by her resilience, her courage, her rise. The billionaire by her side wasn't the core of her power, though he admired and cherished her deeply. Her true strength came from rediscovering herself. He saw her not as someone to fix, but as someone already whole, a woman who had fought through fire and emerged unbreakable. Her husband, on the other hand, was left to face the bitter truth. He had thrown away a queen, blinded by obsession with his past. Now he could only watch from the sidelines as she built a life he was no longer worthy to share. And though she could have reveled in revenge, she didn't. Instead, she chose grace. Her victory wasn't about making him suffer. It was about proving to herself and the world that she was enough all along. The story of the wife he once ignored had become the story of a woman reborn. From heartbreak to empowerment, from invisibility to influence, she had turned her pain into her greatest weapon. Her life was no longer a reflection of what she lost. It was a shining testament to what she had gained. From pain to power, she had finally claimed her crown.